Welcome everyone to Recovery Rockstar. My name is Melinda White. I am a person in long-term recovery, and what that means to me is that I have not had to use mind-altering substances since December 28, 2011. I remain grateful for all of the opportunities to grow and to help others in this journey. Also remain extremely grateful for those who showed me the way in the earlier days and continue to be supports now. I am going to, as always, raise awareness about Narcan, which is known as naloxone, overdose kits, which are available more now than they ever have been. We've even got some vending machines in the state of Vermont. I encourage people, if you don't have Narcan, to look for a pilot site near you on the Vermont Department of Health website. And also, if you access any of the recovery centers, hubs and spokes, you can often find Narcan there. So I encourage people to make sure when I'm asked, how do I know if I need a kit? If you leave your house, you're a good candidate because you just never know when somebody might need help. So it's better to have a kit and never need it than to need it and not have it. Also want to remind people of the 12 recovery centers in the state of Vermont. They are still supporting individuals with resources for not only individuals seeking treatment and recovery resources themselves, but for family members. They have family support programs. So encourage people to connect with your local Turning Point Recovery Center to see what the options are in your area if you're looking for help. So I am excited today because I have two guests that are going to be on the show with me. I've got the executive director of Sauna at Stowe, Philip Hensnarling, and I'm so excited I said it correctly. And I've also got the clinical director from Sauna at Stowe, Max Crystal, which was much easier not to butcher. So super excited for you guys to be on the show today. Thank you for joining me. And we are just going to talk a little bit about what your journey in recovery looked like, and then a little bit about what life looks like today. So I think I'll start with you, Philip, since You're the closest. You're in the hot seat.
For the record, you did really well with my last name, with pronouncing it.
Thank you.
So
I'm glad
good.
I practiced a little bit before the meeting. So tell me a little bit about your life as a youngster.
Sure. Well, my name's Philip. I've been sober since March 18th of 2013. Mm-hmm. I did not plan to get sober at that age, 24 years old, but for me, life as a youngster was everything I could have asked for. Mm-hmm. I was an athlete and thought I would play in the NBA one day, and my life didn't quite turn out like that. But essentially grew up in a middle-class home, and all of my needs were taken care of, and I was a basketball player. That's what I love to do, and it was in Texas. I forgot to mention that. Grew up in Texas, and I'll get to that a little bit later of how I ended up here, because I did not think I would live in Vermont. But yeah, I grew up in Houston, Texas, and again, had everything that I wanted, and thought, if I could just get this sports thing down right, I'll be okay. And sadly, that's not the way that the story ended. It gets much more interesting than that. But life for me in elementary to middle to high school looked and felt like anxiety for me. I was comfortable when I was playing a sport, but outside of that, I was super socially awkward and introverted, and found ways to escape through other means than drugs and alcohol early on. Some of that looked like food to start, some exercise in there, and then kind of transition into video games and some other things. So
yeah.
With that, I'll.
It's interesting too how you started by saying, I felt like once I have this, I'll be okay, and how that kind of thinking seems to follow us in different ways until we're aware of it. So I think it's cool that you highlighted that. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Max, tell me a little bit about what your life looked like as a youngster, where you grew up.
So I grew up in Massachusetts.
Nice. We got Texas and Mass here in Vermont.
Exactly. Yeah, so I lived, also pretty, pretty happy and loving home. My parents were divorced, but, on both sides, I had my needs met. And, on the outside, there was pretty much nothing wrong, right? I was a pretty smart kid. had some issues in school behaviorally. I had a hard time focusing.
Yeah.
I was told I was a distraction to others very often, but that I had a lot of potential. And I felt like I think when I was a kid, I felt like I couldn't live up to that potential. But yeah, I also was a very, very nervous kid. I remember growing up and like the scariest thing to do in school was like sit in the lunchroom, because like no one tells you where to sit in the lunchroom, and you have to like figure out how to interact with other human beings. And that was like the hardest part of my life, was like, oh, if I could just, everything else is okay except other people. Like I can't figure out how to interact with anyone.
Wow. And that's such a common thing that I hear from so many people, just that something doesn't feel right about being in our own skin and fitting in, even if the perception from others are, yeah, she's one of the most popular people in school, and yet feeling awkward and not like we're not enough for some reason, right? This deficiency that doesn't even make sense, and it's not even on our awareness at that time. So thank you for sharing that. So back to you, Philip. Tell me what it looked like when you got introduced to substances of some sort, and how that might have changed the path you were on prior to trying.
Sure. Well, I think like most people, it started with smoking weed and in high school with friends, after school, on the weekends, things like that. And at that point, I was excelling on the sports side of things, and it didn't really impact me. It then transitioned to before school, during school, after school, before practice, during games. And so I started to experience some consequences there just athletically, with marijuana. And once I was introduced to cocaine, I noticed I noticed it becoming a real problem when I wasn't doing it socially anymore. And so right around this time, the real deal making began with myself. And I noticed that I would tell myself, I'm not going to do it this weekend. I'm not going to do it before school. And I noticed just an inability to keep that with myself. And that, I didn't know it at the time, would launch me into years of that at various levels, despite consequences.
Right. It's interesting too, because when I talk to people on this show, and just even in the work I do, it's like we have this kind of line in the sand, right? It's not a problem as long as I'm not drinking on weekdays. And then, well, as long as it's not before 5 p.m. on the weekdays, and just how we continue to move that line and those personal boundaries or rules we make for ourselves, and adjust our goals to achieve our using desires. So thank you for sharing that. It was a great way to articulate that point that we hear so often. Max, tell me a little bit about what it looked like for you, maybe the first time experimenting to when it started looking like a little bit of an issue.
Yeah, kind of similar to Philip in a lot of ways. I think I remember the first time that like alcohol worked for me. I was at this family event, and I got a few drinks from my older brother, and then he said, that's enough. And there was something in my mind that was like, no, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
Right. And I like went around and stole all like the half drank glasses off the table. People were dancing, and was, like, I don't know, 15, maybe 13, 15. I'm not sure exactly the age, but got very intoxicated. My mom was like, what'd you do? Cause I was like very sick. She's like, did you drink? And I was like, no, I didn't. Right. So like, right off the bat, I started to experience this, like, I try a substance, I like it, I then will lie and steal to get it.
Right.
And I didn't know that was, like, not normal. And that's kind of the way that my drinking looked, was that when I could drink, I did. And it didn't really matter. It didn't really matter where I got it from. Like house sitting for friends, I would like steal their parents' liquor. I think where it started to turn for me was when I went to college, all of a sudden I went to St. Mike's, which is how I got up here.
Okay, yeah.
Got a lot of freedom, and pretty quickly learned like, oh, if I smoke pot before I go to class, I feel a lot better. I don't have to feel as nervous or anxious, right? Like all of a sudden I can interact with people, and it's also pretty hard. Like I didn't realize that it was a problem until I was asked to stop for some legal reasons, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I can't stop, right?
Yeah.
And that I think was where that switch happened. It's just like, oh man, like, until someone asks you to stop, there wasn't a reason to in my head.
Right, right. And it's interesting too. I love how you mentioned, in the beginning, it worked, right? Sometimes we assume somebody just dives off into addiction, and no, it's this progressiveness, right? Because it's a progressive disease. And the reality is, like, when I talk to people, it wasn't all bad. I'd be lying if I said it was. It worked until it stopped working. There's that whole, you can't, once you're a pickle, you can't be a cucumber again. But before you're a pickle, it's like, your obsession, compulsion to drink. And it sounds like you had that right from the get-go. And that's, some people don't have that allergy to alcohol or that response, and some do. So I just love that, that you're keeping it real. Like, yeah, it was cool. It worked for a time. And also it gets to a point that it no longer serves us. So tell me a little bit, Philip, about when you realized, okay, you had mentioned, especially like with the cocaine and breaking your own promises to self, that's when it seemed like it was a problem. Was there we hear bottom, but was there something that happened that made you be at a point to tell somebody else or reach out for help and say, you know what, I need help?
Yeah, my journey towards recovery started at 19.
Wow.
I knew pretty early on that what I was doing was not going to work very long. So I reached out to my mom after a cocaine bender one night, and she got me to a 30-day treatment center right away.
Nice.
Now, I didn't get sober until 5 years later, but it started at that first treatment center that I went to. And what they did was plant seeds with me that ended up landing a little bit later and growing, obviously. But that's kind of where it started. And, for the next 5 years after relapsing, I had transitioned to meth and opiates, and was committing crimes all over the place, and just completely broken inside. What did it for me? I went to treatment 2 times and have stayed sober since the second one. Yeah. But what did it for me was getting in that treatment facility, the second one, and seeing my name in the chart and homeless next to it. And it was just this sinking feeling of like, my best thinking got me here. Of all the plans, of all of the thoughts and ideas that I had for my life, like, this is where it got me. Like, I really don't know what I'm doing. And the thing that kind of sealed the deal was like, if I really believed that at 19, I was gonna, turn this ship around and be okay. And here I am 5 years later, like, what does the next 20 years look like if I make it that long? And it terrified me. And that's kind of that jumping off point that I had.
Right. It's interesting too how sometimes people will ask, how do I know if my loved one has hit their bottom yet? And it's not an external thing, right? Like, our circumstances in some legs of the journey might look as such that somebody would say, okay, they've definitely hit their bottom. And that's not the case. You kind of mentioned it was like that internal, like, what else is left? Do you feel like you were at a place with more willingness than you had ever been in your life?
I was. There was some legal pressure involved, but I want to say this, that without my family, I wouldn't be here, because when things got bad and I couldn't hide it anymore, I would go to them, and they would get me in front of some people who knew what to do. Without them, I don't know if that willingness is there.
I appreciate you mentioning that too, because that's a big key right now when we're talking to community members and people trying to figure out, what's the answer. Just in what you've shared so far, it's a journey, right? It's a process. It's not an event. So it took years, and it's just about planting those seeds, and they may not be watered for years, but it's not for nothing. And also when I talk to family members, like, make sure your loved one knows you love them. That doesn't mean we participate in that destructive behavior and help them kill themselves, but it does mean that we continue to say, because I love you, I'm not able to give you this and that, but I can support you going towards the solution direction. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Tell me a little bit, Max, what it looked like for you when you realized that it was starting to progress in a way that you might need a little support.
Yeah, I think like Philip, I was pretty aware from pretty much just, from like, I think around the time I was 18 that this was not going to work in the long term. What that looked like was that I was a college student at St. Mike's and started out getting really good grades, lots of friends, things looked great, to, at the end, it was, being asked to leave school to address my substance use, not really having anywhere to go. I also come from a really loving family, who, my stepdad's in long-term recovery, and planted these seeds for me really early on. My mom's a social worker who, they really kind of, luckily they knew what to do with me and where to send me. Right. And, when I was ready to reach out for help, I did. And I knew that I was ready when I stopped running I ran out of ideas.
Yeah.
Right. Like I had tried everything my way, and it kept landing me in, trouble with people. And mostly I was just miserable.
Right.
And I didn't really have any good ideas anymore. All the good ideas were pretty much gone at this point, and I was on to really bad ideas.
Yeah.
So that was when I was 21. So I was December 7th, 2015. You guys both said your sobriety date, so I felt like I was missing out. But yeah, so that's when I got sober. But it was, kind of just a series of events of being miserable and things not working out and people pointing me in the right direction saying, hey, why don't you give something else a try? Because your ideas are kind of landing you in pretty bad places.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because you've mentioned that both of you have sort of highlighted getting to a place of willingness, right? And realizing that we can't come up with any other answers. And even when solutions are brought, I know for me, similarly to you, even when I went to treatment the first time, they have your strengths and your weaknesses, and the first strength is intelligence. So it's like, oh, I can figure out how to do this, and I don't have to go through what everybody else goes through and put in the work they do, because I'm smart enough to figure something. And it's like, I am forever grateful for a sponsor who always says, I was numb and dumb when I got in the program, and she got it the first time. And it's like, it took me a while to get that, because she's, in my opinion, she's very wise, very intelligent. But what she meant is willing to put aside all of how much I think I know to be open 100%, because like the amount of my willingness was a direct correlation to the blessing, right? So if I was only partially willing, there's a little bit of a blessing there, but there's still, just that resistance to just following the suggestions, because we know it's not complicated, right? The solution's not complicated. It's not easy to do, but it's not complicated. We're complicated. So tell me a little bit, Philip, about once you did end up getting that help, what did it look like with your transition from, it sounds like you went to a residential treatment center for that second time. And then what did it look like as you were completing and exiting and coming back out into the community? Like, what did you do as a bridge to make sure that you didn't forget to keep on doing things that were helpful?
The treatment center that I went to asked me, they said, hey, are you willing to go to any length? They asked my family that as well. And I said yes, and they said yes. And what that looked like was 6 months of sober living and a year of outpatient after the residential stay. So my family agreed to pay for 1 month's rent, and it was up to me after that. I was to live in sober living and do drug tests, have a house chore, and pay my own way. And my parents loved me enough to listen to the professionals, and that they told them, they said, look, Philip's an adult now, like he can take care of himself and he needs to pay his own way and become fully self-supporting.
Yeah.
Saved my life. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was sort of the starting point for an adult relationship with them. They had always paid my way, and that was sort of the way that I got to where I am today, which we'll get into. But it looked like sober living, outpatient, pretty committed to 12-step fellowship and service commitments.
Yep.
It was H&Is on Friday nights in Dallas at a local treatment center. It was sharing meetings without having all the willingness to do that, or being kind of prompted. That's what it looked like, and super grateful for that. Without that, without the people that came before me, I don't know. Again, I wouldn't be here. This is a we. This is not I.
Yeah.
So constantly reminded of that, just telling this little story. So.
Yeah, you and I both. And I love how you're highlighting the structure that was still needed, the self-sufficiency to a degree. We look at like accountability, right? And I think that word gets confused sometimes because we want to be loving and accepting of people struggling, but also not do the work for them because it's essentially taking their power away. So I love how your family got to that point where, okay, we're going to let Philip be self-sustaining from this point on as recommended. And then you feel better about yourself from doing that. And that was my experience too with my family finally not enabling me, even though they didn't realize that's what it was. And I didn't realize that what it was. I was mad at them to stop that. But then in hindsight, it's like, thank God you made me, put on my big girl pants and start powering forward and being an adult. So I love that. I identify with that so much. Max, tell me what it looked like for you once you got to that place that you went for help and you were ready to start this journey. What was helpful for you?
I had a little bit of a different journey. I didn't, look, hindsight, I think, my parents and I are like, why didn't we send you to treatment? But, I was also, I was sent to a 12-step fellowship that saved my life. And, I was surrounded by community and people who knew what they were doing. Took me a little while, to actually get that willingness, like going to meetings under the influence. I did that for a little while, right? I lied, right? I went up there and got my chips when I wasn't sober, right? And, I got to kind of experience a little bit of a prolonged bottom of being around a lot of people who are getting better and I wasn't.
Right.
Which was, in a way, the best thing for me, because I got to be like, oh man, I really actually do want what these people have. And, I pretty much dove into the, those 12-step programs that saved my life. And, that in combination with some good therapists and sponsors and people that have guided me along the way have, really kind of, that's been the foundation of my recovery is within those 12-step programs.
Awesome.
And it continues to be, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And it's really what you're both answering is that connection that we hear that's so important, right? Connection with family, connection with sponsor, connection with peers. That's the thing too, is like, so it wasn't an event, right? Like going to treatment, coming back, we're perfectly healed. Like it's a process and it's a lifetime journey. And also it's not hard once we resist fighting, right? We cease fighting and things just go smoothly. And then oftentimes we end up in a place where we might be helping others. So as we look into your lives today, tell me a little bit about what your life, first Philip, what your life looks like today as a person in recovery, both maybe personally and professionally.
This is so hard. I mean, so life today is so good. I'm almost 12 years in from that person that I described earlier. I've had some good mentors that encouraged me to grow. What that looked like is finishing a bachelor's degree in healthcare administration. Went to substance abuse counseling school in Texas, and got into the treatment field to continue to help others. In doing that, just kind of worked my way up. And kept saying yes to things just like I was taught in recovery. So, leading kind of to where we're at today, being the executive director of Sauna, I ended up here just in the wildest set of circumstances, and I have to tell you about it. I had one of my best friends was involved with the company that acquired Sauna a few years back. He had started working for them and put my name in the hat once Sauna was acquired, and we would talk every day. He was in a similar position down in New Mexico, and we talked every day about this process of potentially coming here. And lo and behold, I get the job, I get the offer letter, and the day I go to sign it to obviously come here, he died from an overdose.
Wow.
This is somebody that I had worked with for about 4 years down in Texas, and we were both sort of coming up in the industry. Well, I never knew he was using, and he unfortunately lost his life. But one of the last things that he did for me was get me this job, and that was so powerful, changed my life. I sat there for a couple days and thought, how do I say no to this? And so I went up here, came up here scared to death, and,
Sure.
and here we are. But brought this mission of accessibility with Sauna, which I didn't mention this earlier, but I had the opportunity to start an insurance contracting company back in COVID, which helps behavioral health providers and facilities get contracted with insurance companies. Essentially, opens the door for people to get help. And I brought that with me here.
Nice.
And so we've expanded access to people that need our help. And anyway, I thought I'd share a little bit about that, but that's my mission. That's what I'm on this earth to do, is to help people in this way. So
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So powerful, like what a gut punch, and so beautiful at the same time. Amazing. Thank you. And Max, tell me a little bit about what it looks like for you today in our last couple minutes.
Yeah, so I mentioned that when I got sober, I'd just gotten asked to leave my undergrad. And after I got sober, had been sober a few months, luckily they were kind enough to take me back with some contingencies, and I was able to finish my bachelor's, and ended up working with children with behavioral health. And as a result of kind of that experience, I wanted to continue my work in the mental health field. I felt really passionate about it. And when I was a few years sober, I got to really address my own mental health, which was pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
So I went back and I got my master's in social work. And since then, I've been worked for a few different mental health agencies, in working in both treatment and or substance use treatment, and also with hospice patients. I was a hospice social worker for a while.
Wow.
So worked with children with behavioral health, inpatient, outpatient settings, and through all those experiences, just have developed a real joy for helping people in my personal and professional life. When I was a few years sober, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, right? And I decided that I wanted a job where I could come home at the end of the day, and no matter how bad it was, no matter how hard it was, I could feel like I helped someone.
Yes.
And I've felt like I've been able to do that in all my positions, but especially since joining Sauna, where there are challenges, and treatment comes with a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
And it also comes with a lot of really beautiful things, where we get to provide this environment and this structure that really helps people, and it's just such a joy to do that, and also just to do it with fellow people in recovery. It is pretty awesome. When I got the call from Philip after I'd applied for the job, I was like, oh cool, we're both in long-term recovery. That's awesome, right? We speak the same language. We've had similar experiences. Our stories aren't the same, but they have those similarities.
I am just so grateful to both of you. What amazing stories. I wish I had more time to talk to you, but I'm just so grateful that you came on the show. Thank you for sharing so openly. Thank you for the work that you do, and for, again, being a beacon of light for those out there that might want to learn more. And I want to thank all of the viewers for watching us on Recovery Rockstar.